The sun-drenched laughter of summer gave way to a splintering, grinding darkness. Rain lashed down as a figure stood, a shadow against the storm. The gleam of a child's toy, half submerged. A whispered voice, frantic and cold. She said they took everything from her, so she'd take everything from them. The final horrifying splash. The sun always seemed to hit the Crestwood Heights community pool just right. It refracted off the turquoise water, dancing on the faces of children who chased each other with foam noodles and splashed to the distant muffled beat of classic rock. For Liam Reynolds, the newly elected HOA president, it was more than just a place to cool off. It was the pulsing heart of the neighborhood, a symbol of the quiet suburban paradise he and his wife Clara had moved to escape the city's ceaseless drone. He watched his two daughters, Lily and Chloe, their hair a damp tangle of blonde and brown, dive for a lost set of keys, their giggles echoing across the manicured lawn. This, he thought, was what he had signed up for. That idyllic scene was the backdrop to his first, and what he hoped would be his only, run-in with Karen Blackwood. She was a legend in Crestwood Heights, a cautionary tale whispered between parents over iced tea and lawnmower noise. Her grievances were as legendary as her perfectly coiffed hair, a fortress of defiance. Liam's first official encounter with her was a blistering email, 12-point font and all caps, titled Gross Negligence. The negligence in question? A slightly wilted petunia in one of the pool's planters. It was a harbinger of things to come. The petunia incident escalated to complaints about the water temperature, then the unacceptable decibel levels of the children's laughter, and finally a full-blown demand for a reduction in her HOA fees, which she claimed were exorbitant and without merit. She's a broken record. Liam, Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker and the former HOA president, had sighed, pulling his swim cap over his bald head. Just nod and smile. She's a storm. You let it pass, but Liam couldn't. He was an idealist. He believed in fairness and rules. He scheduled a meeting, thinking he could appeal to her logic, to the shared community spirit. He was wrong. The meeting took place in the cramped, sterile HOA office, the air thick with the smell of chlorine and Karen's expensive perfume. She sat across from him, her arms folded, her gaze a glacial assault. Her husband, Richard, a man who seemed to have been entirely leached of color, sat beside her, staring at a stain on the carpet as if it held the secrets of the universe. Liam, is it? Karen's voice was as sharp as a newly honed knife. Let's not waste time. I want a full breakdown of every cent of my HOA dues, and I want a full refund for the last quarter. This cesspool is not what I'm paying for. It's not a cesspool, Karen, Liam said, trying to keep his tone even. It's a brand new filtration system. We just had it inspected. The water is perfectly clean, and the hours are consistent with the neighborhood bylaws, which you agreed to when you bought your home. I agreed to a family-friendly oasis. Not a carnival for screaming toddlers and their neglectful parents, she spat, her eyes flicking to the window where a group of children was cannonballing into the deep end. And frankly, the petunias are an embarrassment. I'm a person of standards. Liam explained the HOA budget, the maintenance costs, the liability insurance, all of it. He was a waterfall of reason, a testament to the unbending truth of spreadsheets and community regulations. But Karen wasn't listening. She was just waiting for him to stop talking. When he finished, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous low hum. You're new here, Liam. You think you can fix things with your little rule book. But some things aren't about rules. This entire neighborhood, it's a lie, a happy little lie. Everyone pretends everything's perfect, but they're not. You're not, and I'm tired of being the only one who sees it. Richard shifted uncomfortably, a quiet, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He didn't say a word. Liam's patience, always a thin veneer, cracked. Karen, I understand you're upset, but this is the final decision. There will be no refund, and we will not be changing the pool hours or the rules. We're all in this together. A flicker of something dark and ancient crossed Karen's face. It wasn't anger. It was a terrifying, resolute sadness. Her lips curled into a thin, venomous smile. All in this together, she repeated, the words a bitter poison. She stood, pulling her purse over her shoulder. You all think this is your paradise. You think you're safe. You're about to learn what a real inconvenience is." She walked out, Richard trailing behind her like a kicked dog. Liam stood there, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He'd won the battle, but he had a feeling he'd just started a war. The next week was a blur of summer storms. A powerful system moved in, drenching Crestwood Heights in a biblical deluge. The world outside Liam's window was a gray, watery smear. He was half asleep on the couch. The rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof a hypnotic lullaby, when his phone began to buzz with a relentless, frantic urgency. He picked it up, squinting at the screen. Texts from dozens of neighbors, all variations of the same horrified question. "Liam? What's going on at the pool?" OMG, the pool. "You need to see this. It's Blackwood. I knew it was her." He threw on a raincoat, his heart pounding in his chest. It couldn't be. What could she have done? Written another angry letter? Stolen a flamingo lawn ornament? The possibilities felt so small, so petty, against the gnawing dread that had been sitting in his gut since their meeting. He drove through a sheet of pouring rain, his headlights cutting twin tunnels through the blackness. Water streamed down the streets, overflowing gutters, turning every dip in the road into a small lake. He rounded the final corner to the pool's entrance. The sight that greeted him wasn't what he expected. The fence was intact. The gate was locked. But through the chain-link fence, under the pale, flickering light of a lone street lamp, a tableau of surreal devastation emerged. The pool was no longer a pool. It was a graveyard of suburban comforts. A plush velvet armchair, waterlogged and sagging, floated lazily near the diving board. A grand mahogany dining table, its legs snapped, listed at an odd angle in the shallow end. A half-submerged ottoman bobbed like a grotesque buoy, a broken lamp with a shredded shade clinging to its side. A bookshelf, its books long since turned to pulp, lay in a broken heap on the bottom. It was as if someone had taken an entire living room, a dining room, and an office and simply dumped them into the water. Liam stumbled out of his car, the rain plastering his clothes to his skin. He stood there, a silent, solitary figure in the downpour, a single thought echoing in the cavern of his mind. This isn't just an inconvenience. This is insane. The police arrived moments later, sirens wailing, their blue and red lights painting the watery, destroyed scene in a macabre dance. The officer, a young man with a grim face, shook his head. "I've seen a lot of things. Vandalism, trespassing. But this..." He gestured at the floating furniture. "This is a first." Liam pointed a trembling finger at the ottoman bobbing near the edge. "There's a note." The officer waded in, his boots squelching. He pulled a Ziploc bag from his pocket and carefully slid the crumpled note inside. He held it up to the light, reading it aloud. The handwriting was a furious, elegant scrawl. "To the Crestwood Heights HOA. You took my home. You made me empty it out. Now I've made sure you have a place to sit. You won't feel so comfortable in your precious paradise anymore." The officer looked at Liam, his expression hardening. "This isn't just vandalism, son. This is an attack." She's trying to make a statement. As he spoke, a stray piece of debris caught the light near the edge of the pool. A framed photo, its glass cracked and clouded by the chlorinated water. Liam's eyes were drawn to it, his heart sinking further. He could just make out a family. A smiling man with a tired face, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair, and a young girl, her face obscured by a spiderweb of broken glass. The photo was waterlogged and ruined, a final poignant piece of the wreckage. It wasn't just furniture she had thrown in. It was a part of her life. An ironic, twisted piece of a puzzle he had no idea how to solve. He realized the why was so much bigger than a petunia or a quarterly fee. And this was only the beginning. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind a sky of an impossible, piercing blue. But the clear air did nothing to lift the pall that hung over Crestwood Heights. The pool, now a monument to Karen's rage, was surrounded by police tape and a grim, silent crowd of neighbors. They stood in clusters, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and palpable fear. The whispers were no longer about petunias or pool hours. They were about Karen. Was she crazy? Was she dangerous? And more importantly, what had really happened? Liam, still in his soaked clothes from the night before, felt the stares as he spoke to the police sergeant. The officer's notebook was full, his brow furrowed. "We've got a patrol car on her street just to be safe," he said, his voice low. "We can't arrest her for this, not without proof. It's a civil matter, a very expensive one. And as for the note, we'll follow up." But the phrasing, it's a little off, almost like a confession for something else. The officer pointed a thumb at a small, half-submerged coffee table. "We called a cleaning crew, but a lot of this stuff is going to sink. It's a mess." Liam felt a fresh wave of sick hopelessness. The cost of this alone would wipe out the HOA's emergency fund, maybe even more. He tried to think, but his mind kept returning to the waterlogged photo, the cracked glass obscuring the child's face. He knew he was missing something. The petty grievances, the all-caps emails, they were a smokescreen. The real reason was buried deeper. He drove away from the scene, not toward his house, but toward the house on the corner of Maple and Elm. The Blackwood house. It was a sprawling Tudor-style home, its dark timber a stark contrast to the neighborhood's sunny aesthetic. The front lawn was overgrown, the mailbox dented, and the curtains in the main windows were drawn tight, a black, impenetrable wall. A light was on in the garage, a single, lonely beacon in the gloom. Liam parked and got out, his heart hammering in his chest. He saw a figure inside, moving slowly, deliberately. Richard. He pushed the side door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and old paper. The garage was full of empty cardboard boxes, their flaps folded down like silent, defeated mouths. Richard was standing over a pile of what looked like old yearbooks and photo albums, his movements slow and methodical, as if he were trying to memorize every page. He didn't look up when Liam entered. He just kept sorting through the memories. "Richard?" Liam's voice was a whisper. I came to see if you're okay." Richard flinched, as if waking from a trance. He looked at Liam, and for the first time, Liam saw him clearly. The man wasn't just colorless. He was utterly exhausted, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Finally, Richard spoke. His voice was raspy, unused. "It's over, Liam. There's nothing left. She's finally done it." "Done what?" "What did she mean? You took my home?" Liam pressed, the words tumbling out. "And the furniture. Why the pool? What's going on, Richard?" Richard picked up a small, framed photo from the pile. It was the same photo from the pool, only this one was pristine. The girl's face wasn't obscured. She was a younger Karen, smiling, her arm wrapped around a man with a tired but kind face. Liam recognized him instantly. "The man from the ruined photo. My dad," Richard said, his voice breaking. He pointed to a photo of his dad with a teenage girl. "That's Karen when they first met." He paused, his hands shaking. "The pool? It's all connected." Richard finally collapsed onto a half-empty box, his face in his hands. The dam broke, and a story, twisted and tragic, came pouring out. It was a story of a family, a beloved garden, and a small shed in the backyard. The shed had been there for decades, a pre-existing structure when Richard's parents bought the home. But the Crestwood Heights bylaws, established years later, declared it a non-conforming structure. The HOA at the time, a board obsessed with uniformity and regulations, sent a formal notice. "Tear it down or face a fine. My dad tried to fight it," Richard choked out. He said it was his life's work. He built that shed himself. It was a gift from his father. They had so many memories there. The battle dragged on. The fines accumulated. The HOA, with its lawyers and its unbending rules, became an unassailable foe. Richard's father, a proud, stubborn man, refused to give in. The legal bills mounted, forcing them to take out a second mortgage. When his father passed away 2 years ago, the debt fell on Richard and Karen. "The board kept hounding us," Richard said, his voice laced with a bitter venom. "They didn't care that my father was sick. They didn't care we were losing everything. They wanted that shed gone. And a few months ago, the bank took the house. They said we were delinquent on our mortgage payments." Liam's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a petty grievance. It was a life destroyed, all over a shed. "Karen tried to move everything to our new place, a tiny apartment downtown," Richard said, his gaze blank. "But there was no room. She went through it all. Every box. She kept saying, 'They took it.' They made me throw everything away." And then she said she was going to make sure the neighborhood felt what it was like to have their home, their paradise, taken away. Liam looked around the empty garage at the scattered memories, the hollowed-out life of a family. He thought of his own home, his own children, the safe little paradise he so desperately wanted to protect, and he understood now. Karen hadn't just thrown away her furniture. She had thrown away the last remnants of her past, the physical manifestation of her family's dream. And she had done it in the one place that symbolized everything she felt she had lost. Liam knelt down, his hand hovering over the photo of Richard's father and a young Karen. The father's face was worn with years, but a quiet strength shone in his eyes. "What about this?" Liam asked, his voice barely audible. "The photo, it was in the pool too." Richard didn't answer. He just stood up, picked up a broom, and began sweeping away the sawdust, a final, hollow act of domesticity in an empty house. "We don't live here anymore," he said, his back to Liam. "We never did, not really. This house was always a lie. Just like this whole neighborhood." Liam stood there silent, his stomach in knots. He came looking for a madwoman. He found a broken family. And he realized that the madwoman he had been so quick to dismiss had a reason that was rooted in the very ground he stood on, in the very institution he now led. The truth was not a vindictive act of a crazy person. It was a final, desperate act of a human being who had been pushed past her breaking point by the very rules he believed in. And now, armed with this knowledge, Liam felt the true weight of the conflict. The next part was no longer about stopping Karen. It was about facing the ghosts of the past. The fluorescent lights of the HOA community room hummed with a cold, unforgiving sound, casting a sterile white glow over the faces of the board members. The air, usually thick with the scent of coffee and lukewarm pastries, was charged with a palpable fury. Their faces were a gallery of indignation. There was Frank, his jowly face a portrait of righteous anger. Mrs. Gable, her lips a thin, judgmental line, and the others a silent, disapproving chorus. They had been convened on an emergency basis, and the moment Liam walked in, the conversation died. The silence was heavier than the humid air outside. "I assume you all saw," Frank began, his voice a low growl. "The pool. It's an absolute disaster. The cost, the embarrassment, we're going to sue her for everything she has. We need to set an example." "Frank, wait," Liam said, holding up a hand. He had rehearsed this. He needed to be calm, to be the voice of reason in the storm. "Before we decide on a course of action, I think you all need to know the full story," Mrs. Gable snorted. "What full story?" "A woman with an axe to grind trashed our property. End of story. We need to bring in an attorney, today." Liam ignored her. He pulled out the pristine photo he had taken from Richard's garage and placed it on the table. "This is Karen's father," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This is the shed." He began to tell the story, from the decades-old structure to the fine letters, the escalating legal battle, the mounting debt, and finally the foreclosure. He told them about Richard's grief and the empty house, the last memories packed into boxes. He spoke of the note and its chilling, heartbreaking context. His words were a slow, steady stream, trying to chip away at the fortress of their anger. When he finished, the room was silent. A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Frank, however, leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "This is a very sad story, Liam." "Truly," he said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "But it changes nothing. The rules are the rules. Her father broke them. She owes us money for fines that she refused to pay. The fact that she can't control her temper or her finances is not the HOA's problem. It's hers. That's exactly the problem, Frank." Liam's voice rose, the emotion he'd been suppressing finally breaking free. It wasn't her problem. It was ours. It was a problem created by the very rules we swear to uphold. We hounded them, Frank. The HOA literally bankrupted them over a shed. And then she came back and showed us what it feels like. This isn't about a pool. This is about what we did to a family. Mrs. Gable looked scandalized. "We didn't do anything. We enforced the bylaws. She is a vandal, a criminal. You're defending her, Liam. You're the president." You're supposed to be protecting this community, not making excuses for someone who turned our pool into a dump. I'm trying to protect us from ourselves, Liam shot back, his hands clenching into fists on the table. We have a choice. We can double down, we can sue her, we can win. And we can live in a community that has proven it would rather break a family than bend a single rule. Or we can do something else, something human. He took a deep breath. I propose we take a vote. A vote to pay for the pool cleanup ourselves, using the emergency fund. And I propose we start a community-wide fund to help the Blackwoods get back on their feet. We can't fix what happened to them, but we can try to make it right. A stunned silence filled the room. The proposal was insane. It was financial suicide. It was an admission of guilt. Frank's face contorted with rage. This is preposterous! You want us to use our money, our neighbor's money, to clean up a mess she made, and then give her more money? For what? For her emotional outburst? He pushed himself back from the table, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. This isn't about making things right, Liam. This is about being weak. I move for a vote of no confidence. You are unfit to lead this board. The motion was seconded immediately. The air was thick with the scent of his own political execution. Liam looked around the table, at the faces of his neighbors, the people he had sworn to protect. He saw no empathy, no understanding, only a rigid, unbending adherence to the rules. All those in favor of removing Liam Reynolds from the position of HOA president, please raise your hand, Mrs. Gable announced, her voice trembling slightly. One by one, the hands went up. Frank's firm and resolute, Mrs. Gable's shaking with barely contained fury. The others hesitant at first, then firm, a wave of rejection washing over him. Liam's stomach dropped. He had lost. He had lost before the battle even began. The motion passes, Mrs. Gable said, her voice a cold whisper of triumph. Liam stood there, a solitary figure in the harsh light. His moral victory a hollow, lonely thing. He had tried to appeal to their humanity, and they had rejected him. He was no longer their leader. He was a pariah. He had stood for what was right, but in doing so, he had become an enemy of the neighborhood he loved. The first splash had been Karen's furniture hitting the water. The second splash was him, alone, drowning in the consequences. Liam walked out of the community room into the cool night air, the heavy door clicking shut behind him like the final nail in a coffin. His phone was a vibrating furnace in his pocket, a steady stream of text messages from Clara, his wife. He didn't have to read them to know what they said. What happened? Are you okay? Did they listen? He couldn't bring himself to respond, not yet. He had to process the fact that the community he had fought for, the people he had believed in, had just cast him out. The following days were a study in silent social ostracism. Neighbors who once waved from their driveways now averted their eyes. Parents who used to chat with him at the school bus stop now fell into hushed, uncomfortable silences when he approached. The pool remained closed, a fenced-off monument to Karen's act, but also to the HOA's cold, unyielding power. Frank, now the interim president, was a media darling, giving interviews to local news crews about the unprecedented act of vandalism and the community's unwavering resolve to uphold our bylaws. He never mentioned the shed. Clara, a rock of quiet strength, found Liam sitting on the back porch one evening, staring at the perfectly manicured lawn, the symbol of everything he had tried to protect. They're going to sue them, Liam, she said, her voice soft. Frank told Mrs. Peterson that they've hired an attorney. They're going after her for every penny of the cleanup. Liam felt a fresh wave of despair. They're going to finish the job, he whispered, his voice hoarse. They're going to push them all the way over the edge. He looked at Clara, his eyes full of a new resolve. I can't let them do that. I can't be a part of this. Not anymore. You're not a part of it, Liam, she said, sitting down beside him and taking his hand. They made sure of that. No, he insisted, his grip on her hand tightening. I'm still a part of this community. I still have a voice. I can't just stand by and watch this happen. The next morning, Liam went back to the old Blackwood house. He knew he couldn't help them if he didn't fully understand what had happened. He walked around the perimeter, his eyes searching for any sign of the shed. The backyard was a wasteland of overgrown grass and weeds. The faint outline of a concrete foundation, the only remaining testament to what had been there. He found a small rusted plaque half buried in the dirt. He dug it out with a stick. It read, "Built with love for my son, 1978. He felt a pang of profound sadness. This wasn't just a shed. It was a family legacy. His next stop was the town hall. He spent hours in the dusty archives, sifting through records, his fingers stained with the grime of decades. He found the old building permits, the original property deeds, and finally, the bylaws. He pored over the old documents, looking for any inconsistency, any loophole, anything that could help him. He found nothing. The bylaws were an ironclad fortress of legal jargon and unbending rules. The shed was, indeed, a non-conforming structure. He was about to give up when an old, wizened archivist named Martha, who had been watching him with a curious expression, shuffled over. "Looking for a ghost, are you?" she asked, her voice a dry rustle. "Something like that," Liam said, gesturing to the binders on the table. "An old shed. It was torn down a few years ago. I'm trying to figure out if it was a mistake." Martha's eyes, a milky blue behind her thick glasses, widened. "The Blackwood shed," she said, her voice filled with a quiet knowing. "I remember that, heartbreaking. The previous board. They were relentless. It was all about the rules." She paused, her eyes scanning the dusty shelves. "But they made a mistake. A small one. A very, very small one." "What?" Liam leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What mistake?" She pointed a gnarled finger at a file on a high shelf. "That one. The original land surveys, before the bylaws were ever written. They never got the easements for the pool property right. See, the original owner, he donated the land, but with a very specific, very small caveat. It was supposed to be a place of quiet reflection for the entire community, not a recreational facility. The previous board overlooked that part of the original charter. And the shed. They said it violated the rules, but the rules didn't even apply to them on that property." Liam felt a jolt of electricity. The pool wasn't supposed to be a pool. It was supposed to be a quiet place, a garden, a tranquil space. The very thing Karen's father had built in his own backyard. The HOA had broken its own charter. He pulled the heavy file from the shelf, his hands trembling. He had it, the proof. The HOA's actions against Karen's family weren't just morally wrong. They were illegal. They had built their perfect paradise on a foundation of sand, on a lie they had told themselves for years. The first lie had cost a family their home. The second, Karen's vengeful act, had brought it all to light. And Liam, the deposed leader, now held the final piece of the puzzle. The whole neighborhood was about to feel the consequences of a lie they'd all been living for decades. The emergency HOA meeting was a mirror of the last one, but the roles were reversed. Frank sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of smug authority, but his eyes darted nervously to the door. The other board members were arranged around him, a fortress of indignation, prepared to condemn Karen and to cheer on their new leader. Liam walked in, not as the president, but as an avenging angel, a single heavy binder clutched in his hand. The same strained silence fell over the room, but this time it was laced with a thick, suffocating tension. Frank cleared his throat. "Liam, you are no longer on the board. This is a private meeting. I'll have to ask you to leave." Liam placed the binder on the table with a firm thud that made the coffee cups rattle. "I'm not here as the president. I'm here as a homeowner and as a witness to the truth." His voice was low and steady, a stark contrast to the rising panic in the room. "And I'm here to tell you that the lie this board has been living for decades is over." Frank's bravado evaporated. "What are you talking about?" Liam opened the binder to the first document, a faded, yellowed survey. "This is the original land deed for the Crestwood Heights Community Pool. It was donated by the original developer, Mr. Hawthorne. As a condition of the donation, it was to be used as a place of quiet reflection for the community." He slid the document across the table. "Not a recreational facility. Not a carnival. A quiet garden." He pointed a trembling finger at the pool's location on the faded map. "The bylaws you have been enforcing for decades. The rules you used to terrorize the Blackwoods. They don't apply to that land." A stunned silence fell over the room. The board members' faces were a study in disbelief. Frank stared at the document, his lips moving as if he were trying to form a rebuttal, but nothing came out. Mrs. Gable's prim expression crumbled. Liam continued, his voice now a powerful crescendo. You hounded the Blackwoods over a shed, a structure that, while non-conforming, stood on their property long before this board, or these bylaws, existed. You used the rules as a weapon, and you broke them yourselves. This entire paradise you've built, it's a lie. The whole time you were in the wrong. You were the ones who were in violation of the original charter. Frank finally found his voice, a strangled, furious whisper. You can't prove that. This is nonsense. It's all in here, Liam said, patting the binder. Every single document, every fine, every letter. And I have a copy. I've sent it to the town archives, to the local newspaper, and to an attorney. You can try to fight this, Frank. You can try to bury it. But the truth is out. He took a deep breath, his hands steady now, a quiet power radiating from him. You have two choices. You can let the world know that the Crestwood Heights HOA, under your leadership, knowingly violated its own charter and illegally bankrupted a family. Or you can do what's right. You can use the emergency fund to clean the pool, and you can establish a new fund to help the Blackwoods. We can't give them their home back, but we can give them back their future. He waited, the room thick with a silence heavier than any accusation. The board members, for the first time, were staring at each other. They were looking at their own reflections, not in a perfect, chlorinated pool, but in a shattered, muddy mess of their own making. Frank, his face pale with defeat, finally slumped back in his chair. He looked 100 years old. The decision was made not with a vote, but with a series of quiet, resigned nods. The board agreed to Liam's terms. They would do what was right. A month later, the pool was spotless. The water shimmered, pristine and inviting, but the neighborhood felt different. The children's laughter was still there, but the quiet conversations on the sidelines were more honest, more human. Liam, no longer the HOA president, stood on the newly manicured lawn, watching the cleanup crew pull out the final waterlogged pieces of furniture. He saw the empty lot where the shed used to be, and he knew it was a wound that would never fully heal. But he also knew that he had done what he could to make it right. He had exposed a lie, and in doing so, he had given his community a chance to rebuild itself on a foundation of truth and compassion. The pool was no longer a symbol of a false paradise. It was a testament to the fact that even a fractured community could, with enough courage, come together to make amends. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since before Karen's email. He had lost a title, but he had found his purpose, and in the quiet of a summer evening, he knew he had truly come home.